Hello, I'm Kent Davy. I'm the moderator for today's discussion with professionals who deal with the scene of these tragic events. We're talking with Oceanside's police chief, the fire chief, the city paramedic, and a member of the county's mobile crisis response team. These people represent just a few of those in our community who respond to these events directly. They and their colleagues and others may face their own trauma from these events. This leads to concern about both training of their personnel before an event and provisioning of help afterwards. As we explore these topics, both here and in interviews in our community, we hope to be able to articulate strategies to minimize the risk of suicide. I'd like to welcome Oceanside Chief of Police Torino Valdivinos, Oceanside Fire Chief Dave Parsons, Division Chief Blake Dorse of the Oceanside Fire Department, and Megan Patrick Thompson, the Director of the Mobile Crisis Response Team. Would like to begin with this. Chief, can you describe what the terrible impact is on an emergency response person having to go to the scene of a suicide or an attempt? What do you think?
Yeah, so when you first receive these calls, Kent, you're going into first responder mode, right? So you have to think safety first. You know, was the individual armed or what have you, or still armed? And then obviously you go into life-saving mode and you're trying to save the person's life. Now, whether the person completes the act or not, that person will be taken by the fire department, the paramedics. But if they do complete the act, then obviously you go into crisis mode with the family, dealing with their emotions at the scene, and trying to help them navigate through the situation. And then hopefully after that, as an officer, you get an opportunity to decompress a little, because those scenes are pretty traumatic. They can be pretty gruesome at times. But oftentimes I find that once you're done with that, you're off to the next call, and you really don't have an opportunity to really decompress and deal with those emotions that you dealt with. There are times, and I have an example of, when you respond to one of these calls and for whatever reason, a certain aspect of that call just sticks with you for the rest of your career. And I'm sure these gentlemen have similar instances. And that happens with us. And usually that's because it impacts you personally, and you don't realize it at the time. But thinking back later, you can kind of figure it out.
So it's a trigger, in
very much so,
to relive the trauma or re-experience a piece of the trauma of being there.
Absolutely, and I'll give you the example if it's okay.
Sure.
So when I was a supervisor, we responded to a call of a 12-year-old who had hung himself. And I was the second officer on scene. The primary officer was, maybe 20 seconds ahead of me. And I remember vividly going up the stairs to this apartment, and the young man had hung himself, and the officer was trying to get him down. And the first thing that came to my mind was, oh my gosh, that looks just like my son.
Oh, yeah.
It was a 12-year-old boy. He was mixed race, but his skin was exactly like my son's. His hair was exactly like my son's. Facially, he didn't look like my son, but all I remember now is the hair and the skin tone. Yeah.
Sorry. Chief, what's it like for you guys as firemen to have to go to these scenes?
Yeah, when you ask that question, I thought back to the scenes I've personally been on, and ones that we go to, normally the act's been completed. The partial acts are more like medical aids for us, and we can kind of compartmentalize that into a singular event, take them to the hospital, and we know that there's an outcome, and we hope optimistically a good outcome. But the ones that stick out to me are the ones that were successful in the act, unfortunately, and they're always very somber because quite often the family is there, and they're trying to figure out what has gone on. They may have been aware of some mental health issues or problems or challenges, but what I remember is they didn't ever expect that it would come to that point. And the one that really sticks out for me was a young Marine from Camp Pendleton, and he'd used a firearm, and unfortunately it was not a pleasant scene, and the family found him in the situation, and we identify as first responders with military personnel. We feel camaraderie with them, and so that, though, it's kind of like what Chief was saying. Those ones stick out because there's that personal connection. We're human beings, and so we make these personal, not because we want to, but it's just because of who we are.
Right.
So then it becomes to be a burden we carry. And yeah, sometimes in moments, I'll admit this, and probably I've never admitted it in a public forum before, is, a couple of times in my life, you'll have a thought or a memory, and you'll just break down in tears for a moment, collect yourself, say, okay, I'm a pro, time to move on, and then we just go and do our job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we feel an individual is feeling suicidal, or they're on the verge, or they want to, there's the chaplain resources on base, and we'll notify chaplains. We make sure that they're not alone. We let them know the VA has a whole program to help out, and we'll get them to the VA. We've discovered there's other mental health programs that we can get them to. And again, we never play doctor. We always refer them to someone we know is a medical professional. We make sure if we have to, we'll take them to the medical professional or get them to that chaplain. And then at the same time, we check on them. So we'll check on them by texting, by calling, by saying, hey, can I come visit? So that way they know we're still here, and you want to avoid any opportunity that they're alone. And so that's the best resource we've done. And then in just encouraging through that, and then letting them know we'll pray for them. But the chaplains are a huge help. And from there, they take it and know how to notify commands and take it from there. And the VA has a good system that will help them from there. Once that happens, then it's just us maintaining friendships, maintaining how can we help you, how can we be there for you. That's the big thing.
Megan, with the response team, explain what the response team is and how it fits into police, fire, emergency services as people respond.
Great, yeah. So we're a non-law enforcement mobile crisis response team. We respond to behavioral health crises in our community. And really we're targeting those lower level nonviolent behavioral health crises that can be responded with a 3-person team. That doesn't include law enforcement. Even though we have a really great partnership with our law enforcement partners and fire partners, we receive referrals from law enforcement directly, as well as the Access and Crisis Line and our schools. But what happens is we have a licensed clinician that responds to the crisis with a case manager and a peer support specialist. So a peer support specialist is someone who has lived experience with behavioral health. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, that's just been such a life-changing role on our teams, because there's a lot of stigma with mental health. Okay. And that's a barrier to treatment, is, that we don't want to talk about it. And so having somebody whose role on a team is to share their lived experience, or people have had maybe negative interactions with behavioral health. And so having a consumer of behavioral health kind of explain to them the resources out there and how they got help when they were in a time of need, really decreases the denials of our referrals. So
your team is part of San Diego County Health Services, is that correct?
So we're with Exodus Recovery, and we're a contractor.
Right. You're contract with them, with the county, with Exodus. And tell us who Exodus is.
Yeah, so Exodus provides behavioral health services in San Diego County, and then we're also in other counties throughout California. But some of our bigger programs here is our crisis stabilization units in North County, as well as our mobile crisis response team. And so we partner a lot with law enforcement, our CSUs, to provide that rapid response.
If they deem that the client needs further stabilization or further treatment, they'll go ahead, coordinate with us, and bring them here. That person can either be placed on a 5150, and that's an involuntary psychiatric hold, as a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or they meet criteria for grave disability, or they can come in on a voluntary basis because somebody's just saying like, hey, I need help right now. Like, I'm going through this crisis, I need some resources. And that's where MCRT will bring them in. We'll take it from there. So basically they're passing the baton to us. And then here, we treat their acute psychiatric crisis. We can get them a nursing assessment. We have the social workers meet with them. We have the psychiatrists meet with them. And our goal is to stabilize it within a 24-hour window of time and then discharge them safely back to the community. So with those resources.
Is your team likely to show up at the same time that yours would, Blake?
Yeah, potentially. We respond to the same type of calls. Unfortunately, there's limited availability for these types of resources, and in recent years they've continued to grow and expand. But really, you want to right-size the response to the problem. So when you send, a full fire department response with a fire department engine with a paramedic an ambulance with 2 paramedics. The police force goes on that call as well. Sometimes there's a legitimate medical need for that response to be there, and it's the most appropriate course of action for the police to clear the scene, for our paramedics to assess and treat and transport the patient to the emergency room. And that's the right approach for those types of incidents. But at times, people haven't taken that action. They just are considering it. And so we might go to those same responses as well. And that's where something like the mental crisis response team is more appropriate. They can come, they can facilitate transport to a better location or facility versus the emergency room.
So if you both get there to a scene, you'll stand down and then let you take over, Megan?
It depends on the call. I think we do a nice job of partnership to see who needs to respond first. So sometimes, one person's calling law enforcement and one person's calling the mobile crisis response team, and then we get on scene and we just have to figure it out of who. If there's an emergent situation, the law enforcement's going to take the lead. If it really is a behavioral health crisis and it's appropriate for us, then we take the lead and we want to relieve them as soon as possible.
So if somebody comes into the emergency room on a 5150 and they're in imminent risk of harming themselves, there's a good chance they need some inpatient care. And so the psychiatric liaisons in the emergency room would assess the patient's need and help them get to that level of care if that's what's determined. If it's determined that they are going to be able to keep themselves safe and can follow up with mental health care, then that's when we're likely to get the referral, and we can set up an intake assessment and get them started in intensive outpatient treatment.
If I may,
Please,
so they have been such a benefit to the police department. 5 years ago or so, we were handling all of these calls for service. And we are not the best entity to deal with most of these, right? She mentioned, the emergency ones. Absolutely, we're there. Fire department is there, but we were handling the entire gamut of mental health calls for service. And it was taking up so many of our resources. When MCRT came around, I was ecstatic. I think they have helped us tremendously. Anecdotally, I would say they have reduced our call volume by 50%. Anecdotally. And it's been so beneficial for us and for the community, because that allows us to be out there dealing with criminal type calls for service, not mental health related calls for service.
What I see as positive is that in the past few years we've seen a shift into prevention versus criminalizations, right? We're getting to understand more how behavior works. So when people are under distress, they're not in full capacity to take responsibility for their own actions, that we understand there are ways how we can approach them. The whole unhoused situations, Exodus has been a great partner for us, because instead of calling the police when someone has a mental health distress, now you're calling a professional, a licensed mental health provider that is able to approach that individual that's experiencing a crisis. So here at the LGBT Center, we partner a lot with Exodus and the services they provide, because finally we've seen professionals showing up on the scenes versus putting the police in a place where they are not fully trained to help people, even when they want to. So I think that's really the partnership. And with the City of Oceanside, I think it's very important that also the city has embarked into supporting people and meet them where they are with a more harm reduction approach that's been proven over and over to be supportive of people when they are in a situations of poverty, marginalizations, violence, and so forth.
If a call comes in to 911, I assume it's the dispatcher that tries to evaluate and decide to your crisis team, to the police department, to the sheriff's department, EMS, and you guys will roll fire truck and an ambulance at the same time. Do I understand that?
That's correct.
How many calls will you guys respond to in a typical week in Oceanside?
In a typical week
of this nature?
So I'm not sure, but if we can do the math here, we responded to over 1,300 mental health related calls for service last year. 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Well over 100 a month then.
Yes, or so. And I want to say, at least our records show that mobile crisis response team took 200 of those from us. So as you can see, that makes a huge impact on our staffing and our ability to produce and provide services for the community.
How many for you guys?
So we don't categorize calls by a mental health call per se. It's usually by a chief complaint. But I can say that we responded to over 25,000 calls last year. That's a little over 2,000 calls a month. We know that the primary percentages of when it comes to your standard medical aids are probably in the 80% range. So, it would be in the, I'm going to just kind of speculate, between 10 and 20% of our calls might be in that range.
Right.
But yeah, they're not quantified as a mental health call. It's a chief complaint.
Sure, I understand. Megan, can you tell us when you get to a call, what's the first thing that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends. Some people are very familiar with us, right? So they might already have a relationship with us and know what to expect. And for some people in our community, they might not know that we're even responding, right? Like a third party person might have called for our service. And so we have to kind of explain who we are and what we do and why we're there. And then we're really trying to get the perspective from them of what they see the issue to be, right? Because everyone's going to have a different perspective of what the crisis is. So we want to first hear what they have to say, and then kind of assess the scene. I think safety is always a priority for us. We're always making sure that's a safe scene for us to respond to, and then pivot if we need to bring in our partners. But I think as a community, we do a really great job of screening those calls. It's very rare that we need to call for EMS or for law enforcement to help support us with our calls. So I think we have the criteria really tight, and we keep it tight, and so we're getting the calls that we're supposed to be getting.
One of our main goals for a CSU is to reduce the strain of their emergency departments. If someone's going through a psychiatric crisis, in the past, they would just go straight to the ER to get their psychiatric needs met. And that can be as simple as just getting a medication refill or need to talk to a social worker. So what these CSUs do, and out in the community here at Oceanside, we want to decrease the amount of people going to the ER for their psychiatric needs when they can come here and get that same treatment. That helps out the emergency rooms to handle those situations that are more medically complicated or emergent in life and death situations in those crises. So when they're here, they're getting a nursing assessment, they're getting a psychiatric assessment, they're getting social workers talking to them, get them connected with resources. So when they go out back to the community, they're getting a primary care appointment, they're getting a psychiatric appointment. We're coordinating care with their outpatient mental health treatment program, any substance use disorder treatment program, if they need to be put in a residential substance use treatment program. We're coordinating with their assertive community transition team. And so we want to make sure that they have all those resources at discharge. So like as you see, somebody's in a crisis, they get assessed by the mobile crisis team, they get brought over to us, we assess them in their acute crisis, and then kind of pass that baton to the next stage, and that's their outpatient mental health clinic and all the other resources.
And Blake, when your ambulance shows up, what's the first thing that you guys do at a scene?
As Megan was saying, obviously, life safety is our primary concern. So that includes not only the people that we're responding to, but also for our first responders. So generally on these calls, the police department will respond with us. They make sure the scene is safe. As the police chief mentioned, people tend to commit suicide in different manners. And one of those manners is that they might utilize a weapon on themselves. Right. Add to that they are in a mentally unstable position at the time. So we don't do that person any good if we ourselves become harmed.
Sure.
So that's our first priority, is to make sure that the scene is safe, and our law enforcement partners help us to do that. As soon as we get on scene, then our priority is to quickly identify any life-threatening injuries if they exist and to treat those. Once we've determined that there's not a medical emergency that needs to be transmitted to the emergency room per se, then we'll access resources like Megan and her team to see if there's an alternative, more appropriate option for that patient. And one thing that the chief had mentioned and that Megan and her team have really helped us with is, as the chief mentioned, they were the primary response unit for these types of calls. They were handling all of them. And you could imagine someone who's in that mental state. Now the police department, who most people just generally associate with, I've done something wrong. Right. And you have law enforcement coming in, that's a big barrier for some people. And when they're putting them in a police car to transport them to get them help, it's very difficult. So having a resource like Megan and her team you know, it not only keeps our resources free and clear to run other emergencies throughout the city, but it's really better for the patients themselves because there's no negative association, more of a positive association with that team.
Yeah, if I can add to that, that's a great point, Chief Dorsey. So we're well aware that our officers are, I believe it's 79% more likely to use force on somebody going through a mental health crisis. We're well aware of that. So we try to train our officers to understand that and to de-escalate as much as possible. But the best de-escalation is for us not to have to be there, right?
Right.
So, you know, as we're all mentioning, you know, us having to deal with all these calls for service put us in those situations, in situations that now we don't have to be in because of Megan and her team.
Out of curiosity, if a police officer does have to be there, do you have to treat this scene as, in effect, a crime scene first? Or in concurrence with whatever's going on?
You try to deal with it as a safety, as a health issue first. Obviously, the person, depending on the circumstances, the person's health is a priority. However, if they're armed, it is obviously a danger. They're still a danger to themselves. They're still a danger to others. So we have to take that under consideration. But the person's health is obviously our priority first and foremost.
If they are a danger to themselves or others, that's the kind of language of a 5150 hold.
Correct.
Can you walk us through that process?
Sure, I will try. So in this situation, in a situation where the act has been furthered, you know, furtherance of the act, then we really don't need to have anything else because they have already kind of fit the criteria. The situations that aren't as straightforward, we have to ask questions. You know, do you feel like harming yourself? And I think Megan would probably be able to answer that. But once we determine that, then we make the decision whether they meet the criteria, whether they're a danger to themselves, danger to others, and then we place them on a 5150 hold. But if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is go out and do a risk assessment. And so we're really trying to determine, can this person remain safe in the community, or they need to be at a less restrictive place where they can be. That's our goal, is never to just elevate it to the emergency department. I think that's the benefit of mobile crisis response team, is we have the time to sit and really flush out what level of care that person really needs and try to de-escalate and stabilize. We always try to stabilize person and then transport if it's not needed. We also can do voluntary transport, so someone might meet the criteria, they know they need help, we can also help them get to the place that they need to go for treatment and care. So kind of taking a more trauma-informed approach with mobile crisis. I think that's what y'all have been explaining, is how can we be more trauma-informed and not create a new trauma for somebody accessing behavioral health care. And then once they go to that receiving facility, they're having another evaluation, and that psychiatrist is making a determination if they're going to uphold the 5150 or the person is safe to be released in the community.
So Tri-City Medical Center Outpatient Behavioral Health is an intensive outpatient program, and we have a working relationship with mobile crisis response teams. So sometimes we'll ask them to assess some of our patients, especially if they're at home and in crisis. And sometimes they'll be aware that we're treating a patient, and the patient themselves will call the mobile crisis response team, and they'll go out and assess. And if they're not one of our patients, then they can certainly refer them to us. So we do get referrals from mobile crisis response team.
There's a complicating factor that it's very nuanced that all of our agencies, all three of our agencies have to deal with. Is quite often it's difficult to pinpoint the true cause of a problem. Mental health crisis can be confused with an organic brain problem, with drug use, with other just a simple at-home poisoning, and that's a complication that sometimes we have to deal with. And a stroke patient can come across as a mental health patient, and that is a difficult thing to parse out. And one of the challenges we have to deal with, right? Here we are getting called to what was potentially called a mental health crisis, but you know, sometimes the signs and symptoms of a stroke are not super obvious until you get definitive care at the hospital to check and see, get a CT scan to see if they've got a blockage in their brain that's causing this problem. So this is a very nuanced issue. Once we get into that, the trauma-informed care and actually getting a diagnosis, we're having to kind of do a little bit of this in the field, and it's very difficult in these patients sometimes.
So the impact on the emergency room, there's many different aspects of the impact. For one, We see somebody who is hurting in a way that we can't care for them. We are nurses, we know the physical aspect. If you're cut, if you have a broken arm, a broken bone, we can see that and treat that. But somebody who's having a mental health crisis, it can be a little detrimental because we want to help them, but we're not the best place for it. We're not mental health professionals in the emergency room, but we can get you to the right place.
Okay, well, let me ask Blake, since I assume that the people that your colleagues mostly are going to be, they're not quite onto the fire department or the fire personnel level as EMS kind of, what kind of training do you guys do to put people in a position to best confront these kinds of situations?
Well, in our city, the EMS system is underneath the fire department, right. So we're the same department. We have varying levels of professional certifications for people that respond to medical emergencies. We have paramedics, which is our highest level, and that's considered advanced life support. We also have EMT basics, and that's basic life support. So we have a dynamic and multi-option and faceted approach to how we see these emergencies. In regards to the training we receive specific to these incidents, from the very get-go, when you're a paramedic school or EMT school, you're getting your start in the education of every type of call that you may encounter, this being one of them. And then to keep up our certifications, we continually go through continuing education, and this is one component of that continuing education. So our people are constantly getting updated and up to speed on the latest information out there available to them. And obviously there's changes that happen within the system too. As this mental health isn't new, but our approach to it continues to evolve. Resources continue to come into play that weren't available before, like we talked about earlier, who's responding. So that's part of the challenge for us too, is just maintaining our approach is up to date and make sure that we're accessing the resources and right-sizing our approach. Okay.
We will be right back and continue this discussion later.
You know you don't have to wear your PT gear anymore, right?
It's comfortable.
So how's civilian life treating you?
It's fine.
When I got out, I didn't want to admit that there was anything wrong because I felt like a failure. And then I realized, there's nothing to be ashamed of. So I started talking to someone. Maybe you are fine, but if you're not, it's okay.
Thank you.
If you or a veteran you know needs support, don't wait. Reach out. Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Being a cowboy, I don't know anything different from when I was 3 or 4 years old. I did tough things. I thought everybody needed to do tough things, and if you didn't, I didn't have time for it. I had a very successful career at a very young age, and life was fast. I was preparing physically. I wasn't doing anything mentally on the inside. And then I got hurt. I wanted to be better as a person, and I really dug into mental health. I start my day with 20-minute workouts. I live life 8 seconds at a time. Horses are so therapeutic. They know what you're feeling. When you're nervous, they're nervous. He won't say it back, but we're pals. I take a lot of responsibility in taking care of my kids, my family, and being there for them. You're gonna have tough days. Everybody does. Find a place to stop and just breathe. Love your mind.
Unlike other health concerns, mental illness is not always easy to see.
Third line, please.
DEPRESSION.
Mental illness doesn't show up on a scale. Bipolar? Sorting out a mental health concern is not something to attempt on your own.
Anxiety. I thought so.
Like many health conditions, help for mental illness takes professional diagnosis and treatment. And the sooner you seek treatment, the better.
Look at that. 6,000 steps and PTSD.
If you or a loved one has a mental health concern, don't go it alone. Find out what to do. For 24-hour free and confidential information and treatment referral, call 1-800-662-HELP. Learn more at samhsa.gov/support.
I'm Thomas DeFay, and I am a volunteer at Mama's Kitchen, and I've been volunteering since I was just a little baby. Whenever I get to go out and volunteer and deliver food to these people that have impairing diseases, and so they can't go out and get food by themselves. And whenever you give like the food to them, you get this like feeling, and they like, you see this look on their face, and they're so happy because they'll be able to eat for like another week. And it's that feeling is very rewarding, and that's why I like to volunteer at Mama's Kitchen.
Once an incident happens, is there debriefing or some sort of decompression for the people who have gone to the scene and dealt with the incident or the trauma?
This is an interesting subject because it's become much more prevalent and prominent in the last few years, 5, 6, 7 years. When we started in our careers, I'll venture to say, you can agree or disagree, is that, hey, toughen up, go to the next call, be ready. That was it was a different culture, different expectation of how you behaved. We learned and we recognized that that's not the best way to have a lifelong career of personal mental health, personal resilience, mental resilience. So there are some triggers that we have, mostly related to a supervisor on scene that's going to look around, evaluate the personnel, evaluate the scene itself, and say, you know what, we need to have a formal debrief. There's informal debriefs going on after every call. We talk about it. In the firehouse especially, there's the dinner table. There's a lot of informal debriefing going on, and that's camaraderie, and it's sharing stories, and that generates a lot of self-care, honestly, and taking care of each other. Much more prominently now, we have formal debriefs. And again, what we've evolved with in the past, we would ask, hey, can I set something up for you? But the personalities, we're all type A personalities, and you want to show strength and you don't want to show weakness. And personalities 10 years ago would say, I'm good, I don't need any help. But as the fire chief, as leaders, as Division Chief Dorse was recently saying, we're, about the training and the ongoing things we're doing, we're leaders, and so we take the onus and the pressure off of our people, and we say, no, we're going to have a debrief. We're going to start this process speaking with a professional mental health counselor, and it's okay if you don't want to actively participate, but just listen. We'll give people a chance, and it's interesting, people open up. They just do. If given the opportunity, people talk about it, they share what is hurting them in that moment, and you might even bring up moments from the past. So those things that the chief and I were speaking about in our careers, we have very vivid memories of. Those memories for those individuals, when you get these formal debriefs, become less strong, less poignant, less of a direct effect on your psyche. So we're now at a point where we're a little more automatic and deliberate about it. We don't necessarily ask, we just do. And we find that it provides a much better, it's proactive, right? We're building resilience and coping tools ahead of time as much as possible.
I would just say that we are also doing the same and making those changes. I think we're a little behind the fire department, and I'm not 100% sure why. I don't know if it's just more of a macho kind of thing for a police officer, but we are getting there. And the newer generation, they're absolutely fantastic when it comes to this. And I believe as those individuals get into leadership positions, supervisors, lieutenants, captains, chiefs, it's going to be even better. But I'll tell you, Kent, these numbers aren't factual, but I read this one time. It says the average person goes through 2, maybe 3 truly traumatic events in their lifetime. First responders, we go through hundreds in our lifetime, and you can imagine the impact that has on you personally inside in your soul, and I think we're finally, to the chief's point, getting to a place where we're realizing that and we're doing something about it ahead of time.
I think a lot of people don't realize that if you're at the receiving end of an act of violence, whatever that is, we all react in different ways. But for the majority of people, going to work, going to school, functionally normally in society, it's not possible unless there is an intervention of behavioral health that can prevent you from losing your job or losing your mind over something that happened to you that could have happened to anybody. So behavioral health is really important, and the destigmatizations of supporting people through their mental health is something that really will only get us closer to the solution versus reperpetuating the stigma over the mental health that people might be experiencing.
Well, Dr. Altamirano in our earlier panel talked about the effect that cortisol and other steroids with each traumatic event has and how it's cumulative. And for you guys, I assume that the burden has got to be terrific on your individuals. Do you lose people then from your career paths and profession?
We do from time to time. People retire out from mental health issues. It's not uncommon to see that. And I think that sometimes people forget, and we signed up for this job and we're happy to do it, and we want to be there for those people in their time of crisis. They're human beings, we have empathy and compassion for them, but I do think sometimes people forget that we are also human beings. There's an expectation of us when we come on the scene of any type of incident, regardless of what it is, that we are going to be professional, we're going to maintain our composure. In order for us to do that, there's a certain amount of emotional detachment and compartmentalization that has to happen. Otherwise, we'd be crying on every call we went to. So we have to do that during the call, with this duality of also showing empathy at the same time so that those people know that we care about them on the scene. And then when we leave the scene, sometimes there's opportunity to decompress, or sometimes, like Chief Baldovino said, you're off to the next call. But we've gotten so much better than we've ever been, as they've identified, and that comes from the top. It comes from the fire chief and the police chief and the leadership in your organization. It really doesn't matter if I feel like I need mental health after a call. I need to know my people as a leader, and I need to recognize that maybe someone on the team needs some help, and I need to provide that resource to them. And so I think that's what we've done, is we've educated our leadership to take a more proactive approach. They talk a lot about, they use the analogy of a closet, and every time we go on one of these calls that's emotional, it's just emotional baggage, and we just tuck it away in the closet and tuck it away, and pretty soon you can't close the door anymore. And that's the kind of thing that leads to someone having to retire out.
Right.
And we don't want that, we want to avoid that. So it's so much better if we are able to deal with those emotional stresses immediately following the call. You know, the airline industry, they have the rule that anyone on the plane, regardless of your position on the staff, if you see a safety issue, they stop everything and they fix the safety issue. And that's the same approach that we are looking at with mental health of our personnel now. Is it doesn't matter if you're a brand new employee or you're the most senior employee in the organization. If you say, I need this, we have those resources now, whereas we didn't have them before.
Is there a secret unspoken stigma to saying I need help?
I think traditionally there has been, to the Chief Parsons' point, for us who came through these professions, 10, 20, 30 years ago, yes, absolutely. But we are getting better. But there's room to improve. Nationally, every year, close to 200 officers take their lives every year.
Police officers?
Police officers, active duty police officers, not retired. I mean, this is just active duty. And most of them are in their 40s, older. And they probably have the mindset that, he and I have, and that's, it's unfortunate and it's kind of scary, to be honest. But again, we're getting better.
Yeah. Is it true of the fire department personnel as well?
Absolutely. I can retired firefighter paramedic for City of Oceanside Fire Department committed suicide just in the last year. So definitely the same. There was one thing that Chief Alvino said earlier that I have to comment on. He said the newer generations are better about this. He's 100% right. We're often hard on our youngest members coming into any, whether it's a public safety agency, whether it's the hospital, whatever. But it's really funny. The newest generations that are coming through, I guess they'd be the Gen Zs, millennials, they're actually really open to this. They care about work-life balance and mental health. And it's really easy to get them on board. And that's a good thing. That makes our job easier as leaders. But the difficulty is in the generation that's retiring now. They've had these long careers. They've not had these tools built in. I think I heard of another incident just today in another city in the North County of San Diego where a retired firefighter committed suicide. So it's happening now, and it's still at unfortunately crisis levels that we're dealing with.
There's a lot of resources out there. I don't think, as a general, the promotion of those resources are there. I think there is a lot of room and potential to educate the community of these are resources available to you. these are things before you get to that point where you can go. Unfortunately, a lot of people wait till it's too late, or again, they don't ask for help. Our pride and ego can really, really damage us until it's too, you're past that point of no return and you're asking for help on the late end.
Megan, do you sense a change in the number of incidents or the rate that this is happening inside our population? Any sense of that?
I mean, I think we're all experiencing behavioral health crises in our community, right? I think if we look at the
increased?
Yeah, it's increased. I think we saw through the COVID, we saw an increase in behavioral health. I think kids, like we are serving, I mean, I think opening up to school, we are seeing more minors in general, but the ages of minors that we're seeing are younger and younger. We anticipate that, middle school, high school, but elementary school kids that are getting called out for mobile crisis, and we're there to support them. But I think it's very real, like vicarious trauma is a real thing. And I think the more that we talk about that, the expectation is that you will have vicarious trauma. It's not that it's, not just this person's going to have it and you're not going to have it. It's kind of the expectation. If you go to these, if you're exposed to people's traumatic stories, it's very hard as a human when you're empathetic to not have that impact you. Right. And to have those programs in places and education and how do we help people so they have protective factors to help them support them when they're faced with that is really important.
Okay. There's an interesting dichotomy we have to deal with that you just reminded me of. It's caregiver fatigue. We experience that. As Chief Doris was saying, I want my people to express empathy on every call, but that can get overwhelming and hard to do consistently. And then sometimes you'll have a bad day, and you might not be empathetic to a person on that bad day, and we have to support those people. But what the end result is, you have people that are burning out sometimes, you have that buildup of cortisol levels that just aren't stopping, and it reaches a crisis level that we have to continue to work with our people on.
Yeah. Do you have the resources to adequately deal with the problems now?
I would say only now do I think we have the resources. The problem is we're just implementing them. And so first of all, you're looking at a career buildup of events. We are now implementing new things literally in the last year proactively to get mental health care resilience built up, right? Where we teach some coping mechanisms thing. That's the resilience part of it.
Can you give us an example of what that might be like?
Yeah, so we have a mental health care provider that will come and give classes to the fire department and talk about the things, coping mechanisms to, how do you separate like a work-life balance, right? We as professionals, I think in any of these professions that are involved, we tend to live our jobs constantly. Right. I'm constantly living my job. And the mental health professional will teach us how to separate these things so that we're not bringing home the stressors to the family, things like that. Everybody's different, so they don't prescribe a technique. They say, what is your technique? They'll bring it out of a person. What will help you be calm and strong in these moments where you have the bleed over? When you're off duty, can you do things that aren't related to being a firefighter and a police officer? And that's hard because we live our jobs. And I think the same thing probably applies to a mental health provider.
Yeah, I think mental health providers probably have a lived-in benefit of our training helps you with some of this. We're learning how to teach people how to do these things. So we have an added benefit, but it doesn't mean that we don't struggle with the same vicarious trauma, the same compassion fatigue. I think that sometimes we talk about mistreatment of providers. I think that's in the police and fire department, and that impacts us we're trying to be empathetic and caring, and sometimes how people treat you in the community impacts that as well. I think that's a very real thing I've seen with our first responders. Working with them is how people treat them sometimes is challenging, and we get it's that person's worst day, but I think they're trying to be helpful and supportive and get them the services that they need.
And as we're talking about this, it's really important because you mentioned stigma earlier, and there is a stigma not only in our organizations but in the general public of mental health issues. And we're talking about the impact that we receive from this vicarious trauma that we could potentially bring home. But again, to my earlier point, we're human beings too. So it also goes the other way. We're human beings. We have problems just like everybody else. Some of us suffer from depression or mental health issues, or are going through a divorce or a difficult time with our children or our loved ones. And those things happen at home, and then we have to go to work, just like everybody else have to go to work and act professional and do what we're paid to do. So it goes both ways, and I think it's important just to note that we are humans too. We can relate to people that are having these issues. We have family members that are going through those same issues that we're helping them work through in our personal lives.
We will be right back and continue this discussion later.
Everyone has a ritual. That small thing to keep us focused. A habit we never skip, to clear our minds and elevate our performance. But what do you do to keep your head in the game? To drown out the self-doubt and support your mental health? Maybe you surround yourself with positivity. Or you need to center yourself. And they're not just habits. They're steps we take to lift us up and keep us going. Because being your best isn't just about taking care of your body. It's about taking care of your mind and mental health. So find what works for you. It's important to have ways to handle stress, anxiety, or anything else that comes your way. Discover the resources you need to keep your mind focused and your mental health a priority.
This isn't what you think it is. It isn't a sprint. It's more like a marathon, and I can't catch my breath. It feels like I'm breathing through a straw, and I panic. It's not some stop-motion film that you can turn on and off. This is my life as I try to overcome anxiety. It can happen at any time and is triggered by random events, but it does not define me. I am stronger than the negative stigma of mental health, and I will not allow it to control me or my life.
Calm down.
Calm down. That's what they always say. But if it were that easy, don't you think I would? So when you see me this way, help me. Remind me to breathe, slowly. Tell me to count to 10. Remove me from the situation. Or encourage me to seek help. Go to walkinourshoes.org to learn more about anxiety and how you can help people like me.
PTSD isn't something that is just going to go away on its own.
Treatment works. It helps.
There's no shame in treatment.
Just do it. Your world will be so different afterwards.
It's a warrior sickness. It's not a coward sickness.
Never too late.
I guarantee you it'll help you.
It will change your life.
It turned my life around.
You can find peace.
I never thought I could feel this good.
Walk through those doors, take the step.
Go get help. It's the best and bravest thing you could ever do. Treatment works.
If you could change something in the way things are structured or the provision of resources, is there something you would change and say, yeah, I would like to see, I don't know, more of, or something different, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's this balance between, you know, we work for a government organization and we're responsible for the taxpayer dollars. So you can't always just throw money at a problem because there's a limited pool of money. So we have to be fiscally responsible in our approach. But by having, you know, a multi-pronged approach like we've developed, that really helps because we have different resources and different avenues to get people help. But it really is a system-wide issue. It's not just a fire department issue, a police department issue, an Exodus or county issue. Everyone has to come to the table because this affects everybody. So yeah, in the perfect world, there would be mental health inpatient, outpatient facilities in every city. We would have mobile crisis response teams that could come to every call in a very timely manner so that we're not tying up emergency response resources. always we would want something more robust than we have today, but we're definitely headed down the right path.
We're kind of running out of time, but I'd like to go around the room here and ask each of you to say if there were one or two things as we as a community could do to minimize the risk of suicide among our citizens and residents, what would it be? Megan, you want to start?
That's such a loaded question.
It is a loaded question.
I mean, I always think preventative, right? That we know better, we do better, we know better, right?
Okay.
So I think sometimes, we see a lot of people who struggle with suicidality. There's a lot of history of trauma. And sometimes it's multi-generational trauma, right? And people don't realize that they should get support or get help for somebody in their life because they didn't get that help when they experienced that. So I think that a lot of the work that we try to impart is it's awful that when these experiences happen, getting help and getting treatment can be so preventative in the long run for long-lasting mental health issues.
So what should we do then to do that? Is that money or?
I don't know if it's not, I think it's education, right? I think we just sometimes don't know, right? I mean, there's just so much in the last decade that's come out on brain research and neurotransmitters and how we respond. And so sometimes people just don't know, and we don't know, we don't do, right? We're just doing the best we can in the moment for what is in front of us. And so I think it's providing that education to families, to parents, to individuals themselves, right? Of the long-term consequences when things aren't treated. Like we have a very robust, right? If you have diabetes, you know you need to address it or all these consequences happen. And I think we've done a lot of work in mental health, like that if you have depression and it goes untreated, the consequences that can be long-term. But I think there's some more work that can be done.
I do think people are more aware of mental health, and I do think that progress is being made. We see that here in North County. We do see a lot of people getting help and benefiting from the help that they're getting. So I definitely believe that there is some good progress being made there. And I think just continuing to educate people on the seriousness of mental health, the signs and symptoms of when somebody needs help, and reducing the stigma that's out there about having mental health challenges.
Okay. Chief, same question. What do you think should be done?
So I'm going to throw a curveball at you here, Kent. So I'm going to think outside the box, and I'm going to say internet regulation. So if you take a time to Google or search, how do I commit suicide? You're going to get a prompt that says, if you're having suicidal ideations, call this number. But if you continue to scroll, there's actually sites that you can click on that show you or tell you how to commit suicide. And I just think we need to do a better job, both state and federally, to regulate the internet, because we all know that you can go down a rabbit's hole when you're doing any kind of search, whether it's political or in this situation. And we as a society can do better in that form and fashion, because we're giving kids tools that we don't even know we're giving them. Right.
Well, internet has been definitely a support system. You don't know what you don't know, so you don't know who is giving you support, right? So it's also very risky. That's why when it comes to human trafficking, when it comes to abusive dynamic relationship, LGBT youth statistically are struggling with finding the right path.
So to me, there's a missing component that the MCRT is beginning to address. What happens when people don't know what to do? They call 911, right? Police and fire department become basically the catch-all answer to everything. Whether it's mental health, whether it's a dog on the beach. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lack of a coordinated, I'll say a 911 system for those non-emergency situations. MCRT is a new resource. They're hugely beneficial to us as reactionary forces, right? We react to problems. They also react to problems, but what we were speaking to earlier is about the preventative side, the educational side, but what is the resource? There's 211 in the county answers some problems that are non-emergent for police and fire. But we need something like that, in my eyes, for mental health, that would touch on homelessness, that would touch on addiction, that would touch on a whole host of things before people get to the point where they have to call 911 for these emergencies. You know, we are, unfortunately, there's more calls for service for police and fire in the City of Oceanside every year. Our hospitals are full up, sometimes with people that don't need to be in the hospital. The whole system is under a huge amount of strain. So we need to relieve that strain by having resources that direct people to the right care, kind of like Chief Dorr said, you right-size the response. That doesn't mean emergency response, that means a response to a problem. So, you know, whether it's inpatient or outpatient care, as Chief Dorr said, whether it's the MCRT, whether it's just a family resource because they know there's something happening but they have no idea how to deal with it. They call their health insurance usually, but if we can organize an appropriate avenue for people to get to, I think will make a big impact on society and on the effect on their public service agencies that are responding to it.
It's also difficult because if they are a danger to themselves and a danger to others, we have an obligation to help them in that aspect, but it's very difficult to manage somebody who is manic, who may be violent towards themselves and others. And how do you keep somebody from doing that? It's a lot of components there that we are not necessarily trained to deal with, those mental health crises and disabilities. So that impact there. These patients can also sit in the emergency room for a number of hours waiting to be medically stabilized to ensure that they're able to go to another facility before another facility will take them. So that's a number of hours that I have a bed taken up by somebody who's having a psychiatric crisis. So it delays our care at times. Again, you just have that impact of, I want to help, but sometimes you can't.
Any thoughts, Chief?
Yeah, I had 3, now I have 4. He mentioned a dog on the beach. I would say the best thing we could do is for everybody to go get a dog. I'm a dog lover, as you can tell, and they're definitely an emotional buddy at times when you need them. But I would say the first thing that as a community we can do is talk about it. And that's what we're doing right here. So credit to everybody involved with this project and KOCT for hosting us, but we need to get it out in the open, reduce that stigma. And that's on all of us. We're all responsible to do that. Like I said earlier, we all have issues. We need to share it with people that, yes, look, I'm a human, I have issues too. It's okay. It's okay, I've been there. The second thing is to take responsibility for ourselves. I'm a big believer in if you seek the help and someone guides you down the right path, you know, the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. Once you're at that water, we need to drink. So when those resources are in front of you and you've been given those, do the things in life that will make you happy, that will get you out of that hole. And it's very difficult for people when they're suicidal, they're so low. But once we get them out of that range and they're still struggling with some mental health issues, do the things that make you happy. And then if you're one of those people that's gotten out of the hole and have done those things for yourself and you're in a good place, well, now you can help just one person in your immediate vicinity. Start with your family. Maybe there's someone in your family and maybe they haven't come to you and said they're struggling, but you could just tell that they had a bad day. Ask them about their day, just talk to them and be there for them. And then if you're helping your family or no one else in your family needs help, well, your neighbor or your friend. And just start expanding that concentric circle. And if we all did that, we have these overlapping circles of support that we can offer each other. And I think that regardless of if you're in our profession or in a different profession, if you're a member of the community, we can all do those things, every single one of us.
Pretty wise words. Well, thank you guys all for taking your time and your energy and your thoughts and what you share with us in this. We will be right back with more discussion on a strategy for suicide prevention for the City of Oceanside.
KOCT, the voice of North County.